Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Epic Live. I am your host, your girl, your sister from another mister, Lashunda Leslie Smith. And I am so happy to have you guys back with me for another week of discussions about how to live life and life more abundantly. This week, we're continuing on our topic of Black Lives Matter, and we're specifically discussing mental health and the impact of racism on our mental health. I have some special guests in the studio with me today, Isaac and Shamika Collins, who are the founders and owners of Collins and Collins Clinical Services. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about just the fact that Black folks are tired. Pretty much. We are tired and we have a lot going on, and we really want to be able to speak to this, to what's going on in our country and how we're dealing with it as Black folks, and even discuss some ways in which we can deal with this in even healthier ways. So I'm going to bring the Collins into the studio. Would you please join me in welcoming Isaac and Shamika Collins of Collins and Collins Clinical Services. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the services that you all offer to folks.
Well, Collins and Collins Clinical Services was really birthed out of the idea that we just wanted to provide a safe space for people who look like us to talk about traumas they've experienced in the past and to start the healing journey on moving forward and being successful and fulfilling their purpose as God has called them to.
And those services, the services that we provide are individual counseling, family counseling, couples counseling, premarital counseling, as well as marriage counseling as well.
Awesome. That is fantastic. So I've had the opportunity to work with and get to know the Collins for many, many years now. They are both originally from Rochester, but residing in Texas. I would imagine that you guys still have clients that are here in Rochester, upstate New York, in this region. Is that correct?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's been interesting just because of the COVID-19 and now just all the police brutality and murder of our people but at the hands of police has really caused people of color to look for help, to look to people who look like them to provide a safe space for them to really talk about how this is impacting them and to get some coping strategies on how to deal with their feelings and emotions and going forward.
That's awesome. For those of you who are watching, I really wish it was possible or that there was a way that we could explain, especially to folks who are not Black, what it feels like to watch other Black people killed for the color of their skin. It is an incredibly distressing and just heart-wrenching thing. And I'm sure it is for many white allies who have also had to watch and see these videos over and over again. What do you think those images in mainstream media are doing to Black folks in terms of their mental state? We know that it's a good thing that these things are not able to live in the dark anymore. However, how is it impacting us from a clinical perspective?
Well, I think it perpetuates the generational trauma that Black folks have endured for centuries. And it goes back and it wakes up those things and it triggers a sense in us as a community to kind of go back to that place that we try to forget or suppress, rather. It's hard to forget, especially with the current events that's happening right now. But I think that it really wakes up that dormant trauma and causes us as African Americans become more distressed and be put in a place mentally to where we're not able to perform our daily tasks like we normally would as a result of the trauma that we're facing today.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was going to say also, it just continues to remind us that we're not as significant. We're not as important in this culture that we live in this world that we live in. So it's just completely taken the steps that we tried to take forward, and is setting us back even further and making us feel like we just can never get ahead or never get where, people of other colors of the other color are at this point.
You guys said something that I think was really triggering for me, just trauma. I started to think about the traumatic experiences that I was having. And I shared on the show last week how I started to have the same sort of feelings that I would be dealing with when living in a household full of domestic violence. I was feeling those same things as I was sort of reliving the George Floyd experience. But, George Floyd is just one of many, many Black men and Black women whose lives have been taken at the hands of either police officers in George Floyd's case, or at the hands of would-be citizens who thought they were doing righteous work, such as Trayvon Martin's case and also Ahmaud Arbery. And just the other day, I was in a suburb here in Rochester. I was going to the car wash. I mean, that's a very simple experience, a very simple task to complete. And as I was going through the car wash, and I came out, I don't know, I just started to feel I felt tense in my body. And I try to be very in tune with myself and very, very reflective about my emotions and what's going on. And then I remembered the state of our country right now and what is happening. And so I was triggered because I was in a suburban town that's predominantly white, that I don't have a lot of experiences with. And just being there made me uneasy, made me feel uncomfortable, made me feel like I didn't belong because of the color of my skin. And I can only imagine that many of the people that you guys see on a regular basis are dealing with experiences like that. But even in the workplace, do you want to speak to some of the challenges that we have as Black people in the workplace, particularly in a corporate setting or in a setting where we are one of very few professionals and there's not many people who can identify with our struggle?
And I think that's what makes our work unique. LaShonda, as you talked about belonging, that's the word that stood out for me. As Black people, we feel like we don't belong anywhere, right? There's no specific place for us, but that's what makes our practice, Collins and Collins, so unique, because we make it to where we set the environment to in such a way that people feel that they belong there with our clients. They really feel that sense of belonging because there's the opportunity to relate to some of their experiences, as you were saying. LaShonda, some of your childhood experiences kind of awaken when you're in certain situations. We have that opportunity to help individuals process through what they're going through and then give them a sense of belonging and really help them to identify with who they are at the core to be able to navigate this world that we're currently living in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing that is really interesting about what's happening, and Shamika and I were having a conversation about this just yesterday, the fact that as Black people, I mean, I think it's wonderful what you guys are offering your service, to have someone who looks like you, who may have shared some similar experiences, share a similar faith, perhaps, and to feel a sense of belonging and connectedness. And I find even in just, being in corporate America, just being Black, period, that sometimes we find ourselves having to choose between being actively a part of the revolution and our mental health. Like, if I'm going to stay up to date with what's happening, if I'm going to be kept up on the races, if I'm going to be in the poll, like, I'm going to just, ride or die. I'm for the people. Or I have to take a step back so I can just live every day, so I can just be in my right mind. It is a very unfair choice to have to make. What would you say to those experiences that Black people are having?
And so it's funny, we did have this conversation, just yesterday, that it's tough to navigate both of those spaces. But what's most important is to be aware of your emotions, to really tap into how you're feeling, and monitoring how much media information you're ingesting on a regular basis, and protecting yourself. So even for me, I mean, just the images were so horrific that I had to take a step back and really protect myself from going down this rabbit hole of depression, of anxiety, of worry for my Black husband, for my Black son, for my Black brothers, And so I think it's most important to share what you can to educate those that you love, that you are in community with, and, also protect how you're feeling and being in tune with that, and step away when you need to. So it's a very fine line, but it's important to take care of yourself, and self-care is very important.
That's such great advice. What other techniques? I know there are some people who are saying, "Sis, I hear you. I'm trying to pull away. I just really don't know how. It's everywhere. Whoever I talk to, they want to talk about this." I actually had a white colleague send me a video. I don't even know what the video was. I saw a young lady who was surrounded by cops. I was like, I'm not clicking on this. And I'm grateful to her that she responded. She wrote back later and said, I apologize. This is something I should send to my other white people, other white colleagues, and not to you, because if this is stressful for me as a white woman, I can't even imagine how stressful it is for you as a Black woman. And so what techniques would you give to people in order for them not to worry, not to go down that trail of fear and anxiety? And I want to get to a question about trauma, how to deal with the trauma. But right now, what are some of those techniques of how do you get yourself out of that downward spiral?
Sure. And so I think that what's most important is, what's easiest to do is self-talk, right? Talking yourself through the feelings, through the emotions, and really stepping away from your daily schedule and to-do list to really think about, well, how am I feeling and what do I need to do to feel better, and use those strategies that are helpful for you, whether it's listening to some calming music as Christians, listening to gospel music, just reading a scripture on your Bible app, and just praying. Yeah, definitely praying. And just doing whatever that helps you feel better. And so what I often tell my clients is we go through several different options of things that you can do for self-care. I tell them to try, 2 or 3 of them out and find out what works best for you. And then keep a list in your phone, on your notes, so that you can have that information, that reference to go back to when you're in that moment of feeling overwhelmed and consumed. And you can go back and say, oh, this works. Taking a nice warm bath, or calling a friend, praying, whatever those things are that are helpful for you, going back to that reference and utilizing those strategies.
And I think also for me, working specifically with men, my work with men is really helping them to identify their emotions and their feelings. Because what I find is when I counsel men, they don't know how to identify what they're feeling, right? And that's common within men. So usually helping them to understand that, and then really demasking anger and really putting it where it needs to be placed, right? Because a lot of times anger is set in a secondary emotion. So helping men identify what that primary emotion is, and helping them to step into that water, because some of the primary emotion that I talk about with men is fear. And I don't know a lot of men who would openly admit that they're fearful of anything, right? Being this macho, this protector, this provider. We don't want to admit when we're scared, but helping men navigate their fear in a healthy way and understand that their fear can then lead them down this path of depression or anxiety or straight out aggression that poses that threat that we see out in our community today. Wow. So that's my work specifically with men around some coping strategies.
That's fantastic. I love what you said. just educating the people on the fact that fear is often a secondary emotion, or anger is often the secondary emotion, but the underlying, the root cause of what people may be experiencing is actually fear. So that was a real good nugget. I hope somebody out there caught that and are really starting to dissect and process their own feelings. And if you are listening and you are experiencing some of the trauma from what's happening in America, trauma from your own childhood, we have on the banner the information on how to contact the Collins for their services. They do one-on-one counseling, individual counseling, marriage counseling, etc. But we don't often see many people of color in the space that you all are in. And so this is a wonderful opportunity and we also don't often see people of color who may share the same faith. So if you do subscribe to Christianity, if you are a believer and you want to be connected with a counselor that's going to help pray you through, then these are the folks for you. When I first went to grad school, I wanted to be a Christian counselor because I knew that some people just needed prayer and they needed to know how to pray the word of God over their lives, and other people needed medication. And some people need both. And it's okay. It is okay for us to be able to take those baby steps, get the help that we really need, while we're also praying and walking forward in our healing and believing for that complete healing and complete deliverance.
And sister, you said something very vital there in regards to being able to take the necessary steps for your healing journey. And there's such a stigma around the African American community around counseling and possibly taking medication if you need to kind of balance that chemical imbalance that you may have. And we grew up with the whole notion of, if I can't pray it out of you or beat it out of you, then something must be wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So really having my wife and I to be able to sit down and talk to and help process through their emotions and their feelings and help them to understand that you're not crazy. Mm-hmm. By no means, or no stretch of the imagination. These are real feelings. These are real emotions, and you need a safe place to process them through. Mm-hmm. And that's what we provide. So it's great that you mentioned that.
Awesome. For those of you who are watching, if you have questions about how to deal with the stress that you may potentially be under, given what's happening in our country, or you have other questions about your mental health, I want you to know that this is a safe place, a safe space for you to be able to share that and to ask questions of the Collins while you have them here, because when you call them or you go to their website, they're going to charge you there. So here is an opportunity to get some help and to get some feedback for free. Okay, free is my favorite price, people. Free is my favorite price. But Isaac, you were just talking about the stigma of mental health, or even admitting that something is wrong in the Black community. Where do you think that comes from? What is the root of that?
Well, I think the root of that goes back to probably my great grandmother back in those days, where you don't allow certain information to leave the house because you don't know who you can trust with that information. Mm-hmm. And that information that quote unquote leaks out of the house could potentially end up in a bigger situation that you don't want to happen, whether it be removal of the kids or removal of the husband or something happening in the household. Mm-hmm. So I think it stems from that, and as a result, it kind of crippled us as a community because we don't seek the necessary support and help that we need as a result of keeping everything within house. So I kind of think that that's the root, but we're here to kind of break down that stigma, remove those barriers, and offer support to those who need it most.
Yeah, and I think also we're taught just to be strong, right? Like we have to be strong. We have to put on this face like we have everything together. Otherwise, we're seen as weak. And that's the
happening. Welcome back, Collins. I'm sorry we lost you.
Sorry
Can we
about
just
that.
do a test there? Okay, I hear you guys. Okay. Shamika, you want to go ahead and finish your thought?
Yeah, so I was just saying that we're just taught to be so strong, and when we show emotions, that's a sign of weakness. And
Mm,
I feel like that also alludes to this feeling, this thought that, you know, when you seek therapy, like you're crazy because you're supposed to be strong and just deal with things and just, you know, keep it moving, so to speak. But at the end of the day, we
mm.
break down at some point. We really need some help to kind of move through our feelings and emotions.
Yeah, and while you guys were backstage for a few minutes, I was just sharing that it is that that a persona that we have to give off as African Americans of being strong, because the weakness just allows those who have already backed us in a corner to take advantage, or at least that's the thought behind it. There's also this fear in terms of our children and what people will do to our children. You talked about children being removed from the home, Isaac, but then there's also children being placed on medication. The number of children, African American boys in particular, who are in special ed is highly disproportionate. The number of African American boys who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD is also highly disproportionate. And so those kinds of circumstances creates this fear for Black parents that I need to protect my child. And so what would you say to a parent who is experiencing that? How would they deal with that kind of fear and anxiety around it? How would they advocate for their child in the school?
So there's many resources within the school setting that or environment that can be offered to children who may be struggling with trauma. And I think the biggest thing is identification, identifying trauma from a mental health disorder, right? And not just a lump sum of students going into special education because they're exhibiting trauma type behaviors. That might be a little bit more unsettled at the particular moment, considering what's going on. So working with the school social worker or the school principal to really help assess what's going on with that child. You just can't take one thing in isolation and then label a child and place them in special education. And then it takes forever to declass that kid and get them back into mainstream. I think bringing the parents in, partnering with the community and understanding what's going on in the community and how it comes through the front door and it goes to first period when the bell rings, into recess, into lunch, and then after school and back the very next day. Having an understanding of what goes on outside of your four walls of your school can help children, you can help navigate where kids are and place them in the right services and classrooms that they need.
And I also believe as a parent, you know your children. And I think it's important to really take time to figure out, like, how do your children learn? What's their best way, you know, the best environment for them to learn? We've been homeschooling our kids for this last school year, and I've learned so much about my son in particular. And to the point where I'm a little concerned about sending him back to school because I know that he likes freedom. He likes to be creative. He likes to play while he's learning. And he's learning. He's very smart, but he sitting at a desk and you know, all day long and just sitting, being quiet and, you know, following this rigid routine is just not the best environment for him. So I will also tell, you know, parents to really take the time to learn your children and advocate for what's best for them. And sometimes that might mean going to a different school. It might mean homeschooling them or doing some kind of hybrid education, but being an advocate for what your child needs and don't let anyone tell you anything different.
That is really great advice. I had experiences with my son, my Black son, in a predominantly white suburban school district. He was in what we call here in Rochester, the urban suburban program, only in the first grade at the time. He had gone to preschool, to daycare, kindergarten with no issues whatsoever. And once he got into first grade at this predominantly white elementary school, then all of a sudden we had all of these issues. And I remember the teacher calling me at one point saying that he was silent and were refusing to do the work. And I'm just thinking, this just doesn't sound like my child. And I had this kid at a very young age. So I was in college, a freshman in college at the time. And they had spray painted the N-word on the bathroom walls. And I was just going through all this turmoil, kind of what we're experiencing in America today. I was having my own isolated experience my freshman year in college. And so when I went, it just occurred to me that perhaps my child is acting out in this manner because he feels isolated, because he feels scared, because he is the only black child in this classroom, and he looks Puerto Rican, so you really can't even tell that he's black. But he is the only semblance of color whatsoever in this school. And so I mentioned that to the teacher, and her response to me was, I'll have the school psychiatrist take a look at him. And I thought, you must be out your mind. But my child was just born, but he just happened to be born black. How is this his mental health crises? You know, the school took no efforts whatsoever to try to relate to him as somebody being very different. And I think what I don't quite understand in terms of white America acceptance of Black people in this way is that when we have refugees that come into this country, there is an understanding that because the language barrier is there, because there are so many cultural differences, there's an acceptance there, as there should be, and there are accommodations that are made, but we don't have those same sort of accommodations for Black kids in predominantly white communities, or even Black kids in urban communities that are predominantly educated by white educators. I know, Isaac, you're an educator. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yes, absolutely. And we're looking at, I'm looking at educational equity in a different type of lens, kind of similar to what you're saying right now. And the urban suburban program was part of my focus, as well as the AP track was part of my focus as well, because we're not given those same opportunities. There's not equity within education to be able to allow our Black and brown kids to excel in the level that we know that they can. So really turning and changing the curriculum and having that conversation around culturally responsive curriculum, right? And helping teachers and training teachers to be able to handle Black and brown kids who come into their classroom and relate to them, and then also give them the instruction necessary for them to grow and excel at the same rate as their counterparts. Mm-hmm. So as an educator, as an assistant principal, also, that is my lens, that is my focus, and that is my work to this day.
Wow. It says here, Jerome said he's not hearing you clearly. So I'm not sure if we're having some technical difficulties there, but hopefully that got through, because that was really good stuff. We do have a few questions here. Let's see. Jamie asked, do the Collins counsel children that are struggling with divorce or have a reference? Is that a topic that you guys handle?
Yes, it is. We do work with children as well, and that is an issue that we are very confident in and passionate about, and will provide a service to children in that way.
Awesome. And for those who didn't catch this earlier, to contact the Collins, you can go to their website, collinsclinicalservices.com, and that's where you will be able to schedule time with them and see all of the services that they offer. So Rachel, she's asking, is it worth it to continue to try to talk through the realities of living in brown skin in America with white Christian friends who are strongly conservative views, seem unyielding in their opposition to Black Lives Matter? It breeds more anxiety for her. And she said, but if I, who has relationship and therefore influence, can't keep the conversation going, who will? So that was a mouthful, Rachel, but we hear you. How would you guys respond to Rachel's question? Is it worth it to continue to try to have these conversations?
Absolutely. Absolutely worth it. Rachel, I'm right there with you. I have some white friends that I love dearly, white Christian friends, and I know they love me as a person. But there's this underlying systemic racism that's just bred into our community, into our culture, in the country that we live in, that sometimes white people are not aware of. So my advice was just to show grace and mercy towards them and continue to educate them. And I do believe that with the more education that they have, they will be able to understand a little bit better and be able to learn how to be empathetic and really check themselves to challenge their own biased thoughts that's unconscious in most times. But I just would encourage you to definitely continue talking with them, pray for them, pray with them, and just share as much as you can. It may be uncomfortable, but I guarantee that it will be fruitful, and it will also enhance your relationship with them. They will appreciate you, especially if they know Jesus. Then you have an in, there, and so just they need to do a little bit more digging to uncover the unconscious biases that they have, and the racism that has crept in through just how they were raised, and just how our country operates, and so oftentimes they just don't have an idea. I definitely encourage you to keep talking.
Yeah, and I would say two things to that, to add to that. Oftentimes when people say that they're not a racist, they become very defensive. When really racism is more of a descriptive word on what is happening. So you could be engaged in a racist act, and then the very next moment you could very well be supportive of Black and Brown communities. It's being willing to have that conversation, being willing to be corrected as opposed to being offended. We talked last week about the term, I don't see color. And I mean, I don't know what white folks are still using that phrase, but just let it go. Just, wipe it out of your vocabulary, because that's not helping us at all. And then the last thing I would say to that is I would find white allies who really understand what's happening, who are practicing anti-racist activities. They are being very intentional about learning and understanding how to relate to Black and Brown people. They are intentionally teaching their children and exposing their children to Black people. I would say get with those folks and have the white folks teach the other white folks. Because Black folks are tired. I opened up the show with that. We tired, y'all. It's not our responsibility to teach the white folk how to relate to us. We have been trying, but other, like I said, woke or equally minded or anti-racist white people have more access and have more opportunity even to share that message. And I think that is the best way that white allies can come alongside of us and play their role in the revolution. So that's, I just dropped the mic. That's all I got to say. Well, I want to thank you guys. Are there any last words that you would like to share with folks?
I just want to encourage everyone watching to take care of yourself and take care of your mental health. It's a real thing. And reach out for the support that you need to get through this current time. Don't be afraid to take that first step. We are here for you. Our website is collinsclinicalservices.com. Reach out to us if you have any questions, you want a consultation. We're here for you. We want to see you get better.
Absolutely. And the last thing I would say is just keep having the conversations. I know we're tired, but we have to keep fighting, what we're experiencing right now while protecting ourselves, while being in tune with our emotions, our feelings. But keep talking because there is a change. There's definitely a change happening. I heard that from the Lord in prayer this week that there he's doing something. So we have to keep talking as Christians and just sharing what we know, what we believe, and pointing people in the right direction.
Amen to that. Well, thank you guys so much for being my guests this week. I hope that you guys join me here next week, same day, Wednesday, same time, 7:30. I will have two colleagues with me from Columbia University who will be talking about anti-racist practices. So we'll be continuing on the theme of Black Lives Matter, and specifically talking about how to raise anti-racist children and how to be an anti-racist yourself. And so I would encourage you to join me, to invite all of your white colleagues, white allies, those who you feel want to help but don't really know how to help and don't know how to be a part of the revolution. We want to make sure that they have the tools needed. So thank you once again. You've been watching Epic Live. I am your host, your girl, your sister from another mister, and we have been talking about how to live life and life more abundantly. You all be well, and I'll see you next week.